Hi, everybody. Great to see the participants lining up. Thank you so much for joining us right at the top of the hour. We're going to do the typical 30 to 60 seconds to give everyone a chance to jump on board before we get started. Don't want to wait a whole lot longer than that, though. This is our second in the series, Next Gen Annual Giving. What will replace the Phonathon is our topic today, but really our topic in this ongoing series is exactly what we see on the top, looking at the next generation of annual giving and what that all entails. We've got an incredible panel today, and I can't wait to hear from them. Now, as we are waiting our extra maybe 20 seconds now at this point, I'd be curious to know from the audience, we've got, I guess, somewhat of a suggestive title, but not everybody's replacing Phonathon. I'd be curious to know in chat, what are you doing when it comes to the phone program? Have you gone the route of cutting it, replacing it with something entirely new? Are you reimagining it? Is it evolving? Are you adding students, a student engagement team with more video, with one-to-one outreach? Are there new technologies? If you're doing anything really cool, just to kind of get the chat warmed up, go ahead, drop some of those things into the chat. Let us know what institution you're at and how you're using phone or not using phone. What is your evolution of the phone program? All right, seeing those numbers tick up. While we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and just introduce ourselves, myself, James, and Justin Ware. I'm Justin Ware. I'm the Chief Consulting Officer, co-founder at First Name. We are very closely related to BWF. We are a new company as of February, a separate company, but again, very, very closely related, as the graphic on your screen would suggest. And we're really excited to talk with this panel today because the future of Phonathon is a primary focus of First Name and everything that we're offering with our student engagement teams. James, want to say a bit about yourself?
Yeah, hey Justin, good to be here. We had such a great time last week at our first session with Lacey, Tyrell, Heather, and Jake, and I know you got a great panel here today. I'm James Barnard with BWF. I help to run the digital practice, so work with clients all over the country and sometimes beyond the country for digital fundraising and marketing programs, and have a particular focus on annual giving as well, which is a lot of my background before I joined BWF.
Awesome. Thank you, James. And as you mentioned, we have a great panel. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce them right now so we can get into the conversation. First person on my list, Adam Compton, Executive Director of Annual Giving at NC State University. And what we did for all the panelists was ask them two questions and sought responses to those questions to get us started. And the idea here was to kind of give all of the attendees a level set. Where are these individuals coming from? What does phone look like at their programs? What are they looking at for the future of phone? So we asked, at your institution, is the phone program stable? Is it growing? Or is it on the decline? Is it on the way out? Is it already out? What is the current state of phone? And Adam's response was that phone program is still a critical part of their program. About a quarter of all donors come in through the phone to NC State University, but is declining for a variety of reasons. Second question, what excites you most about the future potential for students calling alumni, or just for student to alumni engagement, keeping that connection real? And Adam's response was, well, we want to rethink where they're going and how it integrates more deeply into the overall program, which is again a pretty common response. We really want to rethink, where is this going? Kelly Sullivan, Director of Annual Giving at University of Texas at Austin, asked, again, is the phone stable, growing, on the decline, on the way out? And Kelly said rebuilding. After pulling back the investment quite significantly in 2021, or FY21, I should say, UT Austin is looking at rebuilding the program. What excites you most? Kelly said, I'm excited about the new technology and automation opportunities that exist to help UT Austin go from the one-to-one interaction or go to a one-to-one interaction. That call center gives you that, of course, over the phone, but what are the new tools? What are the new tactics? Paul Moite, Executive Director of Annual Giving at Stony Brook University. Same thing. Phone, growing, stable, on its way out. Steady phone donor acquisition program with growing donor counts, but declining dollars. So definitely working in that acquisition sense for Stony Brook still. What excites Paul about the future for phone? Opportunity to scale student alumni engagement from a multi-channel perspective, incorporating texting, personalized emails, calls, video is a big focus for Paul at Stony Brook. And last but certainly not least, Jeff Hallett, Associate Director of Annual Giving, Penn State University, says Penn State is rebuilding. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes, Penn State is figuring out how to use phone with a new set of constraints and challenges. And what excites them most is kind of the answer to that first question. What are the new opportunities? Where are they going? The conversations that the pandemic has allowed Penn State to have about the phone. And I think I'll go into the first question and pick up right there, Jeff. I'll go ahead and ask you if that's okay. Are you in the camp of phone is on the way out, or do you still believe that the phone program as we know it is a vital piece of the donor engagement puzzle?
I think it's definitely a part of the puzzle. I don't know that it's going to be the same piece as it was 18 months ago, 2 years ago now. I think, like I said in kind of my answers to your questions, this is really an opportunity for us to reset things and take a hard look at how are we using that channel. And I think we'll get into a lot about what some of those changes we're seeing are going to be.
Awesome. Same question around the room. Kelly, what do you think? Phone on the way out, staying put, is it still a vital piece of the donor engagement puzzle?
I think that as with everything in the past 2 years, everything has to evolve, and it almost has forced us to evolve faster than we would have otherwise. But we used to do mail, phone, email. Like it was just mail for a while, then it was mail and phone, and then it was mail, phone, and email. And they're slowly losing a piece of the puzzle to things like crowdfunding and giving day and texting and video and one-on-one, digital opportunities where, our students can do other things. So I don't think it's going away, but I don't think it has as big of a piece of the pie as it has in the past.
Paul, Stony Brook, what's your take?
I'm in agreement with Jeff and Kelly. For us, it's something that has still produced donors, and it's a key part of like our calling for annual giving is try to make sure that we're increasing the donor base. And so we're doing that in a healthy way through the phone program. I really focus on acquisition and just paying attention to the acquisition segments that actually pick up. Our partner has done a really good job of making sure that our ID when we call out shows that it's Storybook as well too. Since nowadays everybody has cell phone identity that if it says scam or something like that, it's automatically just going to get lost and not get picked up. So it is a piece of the puzzle in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. I think each year we challenge ourselves to do different things based off of what the data tells us, and just stay evolving and stay flexible with it.
Well, do you mind me asking who are some of the segments that pick up?
Yeah, so surprisingly, the younger alumni are picking up at higher rates for us than people who've been out of school for a while. Maybe it's because they don't normally get phone calls. That's kind of like our hypothesis right now. And so we tend to get a lot of good acquisition from 3 to 10 year graduates out, 3 to 10 years out undergraduates population. And then we notice a drop off, for alumni who are a little bit older. They don't tend to pick up as much, especially for the acquisition segments.
Adam, quarter roughly of giving. I'm assuming you're probably not just going to pull the plug on the phone, but maybe. What camp are you in?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, our donor counts, are a critical measurement or a KPI for us, and the call center does help in bringing those donors in. There are donors that are only going to give when they get that reminder phone call. What I really think the future is about, though, is that student outreach is a critical part of any annual giving program. It's sometimes the only time that some of our donors will, and our alumni and those that we're engaging with will speak with a student or engage with that student. What I think we have to re-envision about it is it traditional of putting 25, 60, how many ever students it is into one room and doing multiple calls out, or what does that look like? How do we engage people where they are and where they want to be engaged through text, through video, through all the different means that in some ways COVID has really made people more comfortable with. The other side I would add is that we've got to constantly be, everything has to be up for discussion and being looked at and evaluated. And how do we, as we bring on things like market automation and other areas, do we better integrate? That we need our messaging to align from our phone to our mail to our email strategy versus, our phone running over on one side and mail, email, text even running on the other side with very different messaging. How do we bring all that together in one cohesive message? I think that's really, what the future is about as well.
Kind of a follow-up, Adam, you talked about going to where the donors are, meeting them where they are. How do we know? What tactics are in place? What strategies are in place? What tools are in place that are helping us discover, not phone for this segment, video-driven student engagement? Text here, but not here. Direct mail, keep going with this group because they're reliable. All right. What kind of thought are you putting into that?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. One, you have to test everything. You have to always, I think one of the lines we use around here is always be testing. And what segments respond that way? Is it, multi-channel and where, it's a combination of they're seeing a Facebook video where it's that student, and then maybe they're getting an email from that student, and then could they get a phone call from that student or a text message or a personalized video outreach? That's truly like the integration. What we're looking at too is like, how do people respond? What are the series that we're sending somebody before they respond? Is it that, is it the phone call that ultimately reminds somebody to mail that piece of mail in? And trying to measure some of those things. Some of it is trial and error to a certain extent, but I also think, as scoring, as big data, becomes a larger part of our programs, what's third-party data that we can bring in to understand who is likely to respond to mail, who's still picking up their phone. Those type of things are all things that have to be thought about and measured against.
Yeah, speaking of measuring, obviously acquisition, that's what phone's been a big part of the pie for quite some time. That was the objective, probably still is in a lot of cases. But what else? What are some other things that you're measuring in terms of, just what are the goals? What do the metrics look like around phone for stewardship, for address updates? Anybody want to speak to that?
I'll take a shot at that. So for us, it is a key component for making sure that we have updated email addresses, especially for acquisition segments. Our young alumni tend to leave with their Stony Brook email address. So the fact that we're able to reach them on the phone does help us get their Gmail or any other provider that they use. So that's hugely helpful. We do track that, and it is beneficial. I can't say the percentage, but I do know it's a couple hundred that we get per year that we didn't have before we made the calls. So that's something that's huge for us. And then, the big rethink of the future is just making sure that we're not just thinking about it in terms of fundraising. We're thinking about it as a engagement opportunity, event registration encouragement, maybe surveys that the university would like to do. So there are a few things we're thinking about with the new vice president, so that the Phonathon is thought about more broadly other than just a fundraising tool. So that's something that's exciting that I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, and picking up off of what Paul was saying, we're also doing some of those non-solicitation activities as well. We're doing a survey right now. We've done event registration type things in the past. But I think another area in terms of the solicitation side is reactivation. We're looking at people who have dropped off either because of the pandemic and they've just lost contact with us, or they are longer lapsed than predating the pandemic, and we're going back to those people and saying, we're doing this thing, we think you're interested in it because you've done something to that respect in the past, and let's try to get you on board. And that seems to be a good target for us. I don't have numbers on how successful it is, but that's another area that we're looking at as well.
I'll say that in adding texting to our portfolio in the past 2 or 3 years, I'm grateful that we did so much cell phone append research on the phone in the years leading up to that. And I think that helped us utilize texting as a tool. And so just being able to, verify those numbers because the students were calling them, there was value in that in previous years that didn't generate revenue. But our student callers aren't just calling, they're texting. So they might be we have a first-time donor journey where they're getting a text message as well as a thank you call as part of their first-time donor journey. And our student callers are doing both of those things. And I think we oftentimes look at the number of outreaches that we're able to do via phone that we are doing to groups that we don't send mail to, we don't necessarily email as much, but they're able to have those one-on-one conversations and those one-on-one interactions with us. And that's the part that the future is, how do we scale a real-time, real conversation with an alum about something that they've said, and we react to their current behavior. That's what you can do on the phone. You can react to what they say, what they love, what they're interested in. And technology is catching up that we're going to be able to do that better. And we are able to do that better now than we could before. So.
That's a good point. I mean, phone is kind of the ultimate agile tool because you're always in real time when you're having those conversations. But as we've seen with a lot of other technologies, we can be pretty close, if not in actual real time too, over video, over text message, things like that.
Exactly.
Adam, anything to add to the conversation there?
Yeah, I would just say, it's one of the few ways in which we're actually reaching out to folks and verifying their contact information. So that's a great avenue. I think part of this rethinking and re-envisioning is the opportunity to really think about it as an advancement outreach opportunity. And so it's not just, calling and dialing for dollars. It's those, it's the opportunity to gather data. It's the opportunity to connect with somebody, to understand their story. How do we bring them deeper down the engagement funnel? And that's, I think, really some of what, as we rethink how we do this, measuring other KPIs with it.
I want to just draw attention to the chat. Cameron Hall at Texas Tech had some good sort of comments about things they're using their digital engagement center for that I thought are worth sharing. To your point, Adam, he's saying that they use it for things like managing portfolios of donors, quantifying estate plans, scheduling donor visits. Have any of you all been doing things like that are beyond, asking for that annual fund level donation?
It's all things that we are looking at and trying to figure out. We've tested around a little bit with call scheduling for development officers. We do have a leadership annual giving program that is really being kind of digital first, that is doing a lot of that as well. And they're using calling software, but have text, email, video, all those kind of components. And they're doing much more of that at the lead annual level.
Yeah, I think I think it's a lot of the turning the battleship metaphor. I think these are things that we are all looking at Penn State. It's just a matter of getting the commitment to actually do it, and that oftentimes takes a lot more. Just as an example, how do you make sure that the database gets this new type of information that you're collecting, and making sure that that stays accurate across the board so that everybody gets the same information, kind of getting that single source of truth. And those are just things that take time to work through. But yeah, we're definitely looking at a lot of the things that have been kind of going through in the chat.
So, one of the first people to really take us up on the student engagement team concept is right here on the call. Paul, really saw this a couple of years ago as an opportunity for the Day of Giving at Stony Brook, and built the Donor Experience Ambassadors, is what they were called at Stony Brook, heavily video based. And as it turned out, perfect timing because we launched at the beginning of March of 2020, and then we went remote, and we had to have that. So very prescient, Paul. Good on you to get ahead of the game in that way. But that's a tactic, right? Student engagement team, student gift officers, whatever we want to call them, working with students to be active on video primarily and other channels. I'm wondering, as we look at this rebalancing, what are you doing now? What are you doing in the next 12 to 18 months? Kelly, I'll start with you. What's on your wish list for ways to enhance, what used to just be the Phonathon, but is now a multi-channel effort?
Yeah, I have a lot of things on my wish list. We have some really ambitious goals at UT Austin to grow our donor number from about 105,000 donors to 150,000 donors. So I need every tool in the toolbox to make that happen. And we're looking across every single constituency for that. So parents, faculty, staff, students, alumni. I would really like to be able to have students and think of them as digital gift officers, and maybe some staff members, and think of them this way. And I think some of this is just a turning point of, there's some concern about students. Can students really do this work? Are students able to kind of execute in this mass quantity without a staff member double checking everything that they do? So I want that. I want to be able to use digital engagement officers and have them do more than just make phone calls and text for us, and produce content, and really use all these other tools that we have at our disposal in a meaningful way. And obviously our concerns, some of which are, it's like, how do you reallocate budget from other things to make things happen? How do you make sure that you have the staff and manpower to make those things happen? And then how do you just convince that doing something that everyone else hasn't done is the next step and the next place that you want to be? And then how do you do it without, potentially losing funds for your institution? And all these are, there's, again, lots of things I want. I would like to be able to do this with y'all, and really just, I want to take advantage of our students and their resources. That's what I want to be able to do. Our students are a plethora of resource for us. They can create content, they can produce things, they have stories, they're a part of what we do. And we don't take advantage of that enough. So,
Jeff, I know Penn State is really taking a pretty ambitious, holistic look at what they're doing in this space. What are the tactics you're looking at? What are you exploring?
So I think for my part, and it's interesting that I'm on a Phonathon conversation, because oftentimes people see me as the boogeyman coming in to take over the phone with the digital fundraising stuff that I oversee. But I think where we're looking is how the big question that we're trying to answer is, how do we do personalization at scale? And I know that's a common statement across the board. I think we have used it in some of our pre-call prep sessions, and getting to something that Adam was saying earlier, it really is that holistic, everywhere. How do you make sure that what someone is seeing from Penn State is consistent across the board, so that if this person is interested in sustainability, how do we make sure that everything they get in through whatever communications medium they're engaging with the university is related to that? And I'll be the first to admit that we don't have the answer to that. But we're working through it. And I think we'll get there eventually. But it's that personalization at scale thing is the piece that we're really driving towards.
Thank you to everybody in the chat. I see it blowing up, and I'm kind of able to pay some attention. James is able to pay a little bit closer attention. James, any questions popping up there that we haven't touched upon that you think would be great to ask the full group?
Yes, so Tyrell was asking in the chat, and there's some people have been able to answer him here, but your thoughts on creating a hybrid engagement model where you have kind of this mix of traditional student outreach, much more like what a Phonathon used to look like, that compared with students who may be having a small portfolio and really using these sort of sales enablement, sales engagement tactics. I know some of you have answered in the chat, but Adam, you want to speak a little bit perhaps to like what you have in your vision? I know you said you're not quite there yet, but you're sort of working on all of this.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, like, you think about your pyramid and where people live in the donor pyramid, and there's definitely an opportunity for students to take apart and manage a small portfolio of people and have those conversations to where they're coming, maybe they're working remote, maybe they're coming into an office and working and doing these different kind of sales outreach, text, phone, video, all those type of things. And just what part of the pyramid they fit in. I think from the other side of it as well is we're all, how do we recruit people to work in this industry? I think a lot of people, when you talk to them about, I fell into a job with advancement, I think it is the line that we hear a lot. And it's like, well, let's start having those conversations when they're students and giving them the opportunity. And so it's a great way to also kind of grow our own. I think that's the other side of this that I'm most interested in, and having, starting this out. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But I don't think, for us, as I said, a quarter of donors coming in through this, phone has to be a critical component until we're able to kind of figure out some of those other areas as well.
You sort of touch on a key point here, which is, where would the advancement industry be without all of those professionals who grew up in the call center, got their start? I was one of those people, terrible Phonathon caller, but somehow still managed to make a career out of it. So many people came up through that space, and it was a training ground. So, I love this idea of being able to kind of bring this hybrid program together, like what you have in mind, and really kind of, using some of those traditional tactics that in some ways are still working in more specific places, but then really like getting this personal engagement at scale thing going. Student portfolios, I think, is a super cool idea that we're seeing people do more and more. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, just to touch on the student portfolio piece a little bit. One thing that started a while ago at Georgetown University was sort of like a discovery program where students were assigned a portfolio, and measured in terms of how successful they were, acquiring and qualifying prospects to follow up with development officers. We had a bit of a trial at that when I was working at FIU about 6 years ago. The challenge with that is you really have to recruit really motivated students. As we can all attest to, we manage phone programs, the consistency might not be there. So I think that's the biggest challenge we have to answer in terms of creating student portfolios is, are we going to have these students for the full semester or for the full academic year building that relationship, or is it somebody that we're going to hire for multiple years? Because if we're really trying to build that relationship with the donors that they're reaching out to, they'll need to be on board for a pretty significant period of time. And so we're thinking of a hybrid model. We noticed that when we bring on leadership annual giving officers at Stony Brook, I've tended to recruit individuals who already experienced. I'm really going to look at the Phonathon program to be sort of like the feeder for our leadership annual giving program, and then have maybe 3 or 4 really motivated students who may live within the phone program, who sort of do steward a portfolio. How they do that, I think definitely open to speaking to other members who try this to kind of figure out like what works, what doesn't work. But I really think that like that tenure is going to be critical as we think about like how to staff students with portfolios, because if it's just somebody who comes and tries it for a little bit and then they don't hear from other students, like we're back to square one basically.
Yeah,
I didn't know.
Sorry, Justin.
Oh, good. Jeff.
I was just going to say, I don't think we have looked at the portfolio piece yet. We might fall into it because of some of the staffing challenges that we have with just recruiting students to work in the call center. But I think to Paul's point, if we're looking at the relationship that they have with the institution, not as that individual student, looking at the individual touch points, something that we see in volunteer management side of things is volunteers don't want long protracted engagements. They want those small things that they can do in an afternoon or a day. And I think if we can take that same approach from a student portfolio perspective, maybe that's the way to go. I don't know, we've never tried it, but maybe that's the way to think about it.
So I did see something pop in on the chat here that I thought would be a really good question. We're talking about the move to remote. We see a lot of calling programs that have gone remote, and a lot of places have been, happy with the success there. Of course, on our student engagement team for the first year of COVID, that's all it was remote, and a lot of the work remains remote to this day. Paul, you've got experience with this, having students do remote work, both in the calling sense and in the student engagement team DXA sense. What are your observations? How do we keep students engaged? Because with the call centers, you have this big, vibrant group, 30 kids coming together, pizza parties. There's an energy to a call center for those who've been part of a call center. Absent that, how do we keep students incentivized and engaged?
That's a really good question. I was really wrestling with that as we began this semester and made the decision to stay remote, even though we had students back on campus. We've thought about a few different things. I know that there's a pre-session that all the students get together with our vendor, and the manager for our vendor, Wilson Bennett. And they really just discuss, the upcoming shift, and maybe they might share a few stories. There's competitions that they still play, even though it's virtual. So that there's still that sense of camaraderie. But I really was trying to, at the beginning of the semester, just, get students together, because I know a big part of my Phonathon experience when I was a student caller was like the relationships built there, like, on the actual calling floor. But I think the flexibility has also allowed us to retain students at a higher clip. I think the flexibility has also allowed us to get, a little bit more of the commuter student population who tend to be, in some cases, a little bit more, less distracted, because they're really focused on their academics, and then, the job that they get will be a lot more, taken a little bit more seriously. So it's, I don't have like the perfect answer, Justin, but I think that there are things that I've noticed our program doing in terms of, having a pre-shift, still having virtual games and competitions, each evening that keep the, that engagement level of the student employees up. When we started working together with the donor experience officers, I think that for us, that weekly session was really helpful for them to kind of have ideas to bounce off of each other, receive feedback on the videos that we're, video content that we're producing. So I think it's just a matter of bringing the group together, that at least you have some engagement there, rather than keeping them in silos and saying, hey, here's your column, let's get after it,
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think, one of the things it did was we allowed the students to have some ownership over campaigns. I mean, SBU Together, was a hashtag campaign that essentially went to the students and said, what are you feeling? And it was beginning of the pandemic, and they said, well, we're missing that connection with each other, with our campus, being physically present. So, well, okay, how do we address that? How do we build a content campaign leading up to that May 5th Giving Day event? And they came up with SBU Together. It was an Instagram takeover. They did a lot of questions and the stories, got tremendous engagement. I think the organic growth on that channel was more than 100%, maybe, or more than 200%. I mean, more than double the growth there. So part of it, I think, is just allowing them ownership over the path and the direction of the program, especially in a remote setting. Probably helped a lot in that case. Anyone else? Jeff, Adam, Kelly, any other ideas? Have you been doing remote with students for calling with digital, and how has that worked? How have you kept them inspired?
Our callers have been remote and they've stayed remote, and we've done some really simple things for them. I mean, for our giving day one year, we let them stop in at the office and pick up like bags of swag as well as bags of like snacks to keep them going. Because in previous years, we would have fed them for, calling during giving day for multiple shifts. So if they were local, they were able to pick that up. We've sent them thank you videos from our staff where we've just said, hey, like using our tools saying, thank you so much for participating and helping us do ABCD, whether it was a giving day or another campaign. As a former call center manager, sometimes I like to remind myself and everyone else that these student callers are going to graduate, and between 24 hours, they're going to go from one of your students to one of your alumni, and potentially one of your staff members or potentially one of your colleagues. So, they're professionals. They're not just, these students that you're working with. So treating them as such, I think, is helpful, and that they're going to need the same type of engagement that your staff has needed during this time. So we've tried to do some of those things while also realizing that it's really hard and it has not been easy for us as an industry, I think, to evolve into that. So.
The only new piece that I would throw into it is we are now a hybrid. We have some people coming into the actual call center and a decent portion still calling remotely. And that's created a lot of technical challenges too. And, our phone team was always good at the tech support gig, but they have had to learn a whole lot of new things in this kind of remote working environment. And those challenges are really, really tough. Some on the technical side, things like PCI compliance and all of that. How do you take a credit card if a student is calling from their dorm room? Those are all questions that we're still actively working through.
All right. Halfway through here, just about. So I'm going to take a 30-second break here to get a message from our sponsor, so to speak. James, if you wouldn't mind taking half a minute and talking a little bit about what you're working on the BWF side of the house.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. So at BWF, we empower philanthropy by helping our clients to create tangible strategies that align with their unique fundraising goals. In particular, I work with a lot of clients in higher education, healthcare, and national nonprofits, and we develop a lot of digital fundraising plans and annual giving strategies that really are tailored to meet their needs. I do find that no two clients are the same, particularly in a conversation like this one around what's the evolution of your phone program. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution necessarily that works for everybody. So what we can do is we can really hone in on what are the specific challenges that you're facing, what are the resources that are available, what are you really trying to achieve, and help you to create a plan to maximize that opportunity. So that's a little about what we do at BWF. Thanks for the opportunity, Justin.
Awesome. Thanks very much, James. So call out to the crowd here just for something in particular. I'm curious about technologies. We see a lot of things. We hear a lot of things. We always come across new things, whenever we have these conversations. So over in the chat, if everybody out there, if there's something that's really neat that you found that works really well to facilitate student to alumni engagement or student outreach, whether it's, automated platform, a video service, list off some examples here. I'd love to see what everybody's using, get an opportunity to sort of share our toolkits. So as you're doing that, as everybody's dropping that in, someone talked earlier about sort of selling this up the chain, right? And I know Jeff, you said, hey, that this gave us the opportunity to have new conversations. Pandemic, gave us the opportunity to have new conversations. So what are those conversations looking like? And Adam, I'll start with you. I mean, how are you communicating this up the chain? What are those conversations looking like? What is leadership focused on, and where do they want you to take these programs?
Yeah, I think leadership, rightfully so, is focused on ROI and where are we going to get the best, best bang for our dollar. But it's more than just the dollar side of things. It's like, what is the best way in which to engage those conversations with our alumni? Unlike, political world, for example, your list is in higher ed is finite to a certain extent. It's not like we're actively going out and recruiting new emails every single day in a lot of ways for our email list. Our email list is our alumni base. And so how do we engage those people in a way that doesn't turn them off? It doesn't, that keeps them engaged with the university. And so we're having conversations in a couple of ways. One about like, what does the larger engagement strategy look like? And what does the different pieces that we can pull on to ultimately drive that deeper down the engagement funnel, donations, volunteering, all those kind of things down the engagement funnel. The other side of the conversation is that ROI conversation. Are we spending dollars the right way? It's funny, somebody asked in the chat, it's not really funny, but it's interesting. It's like, I can't remember the exact wording or who asked it, but it was basically like, if you didn't, here it is from Paul. If you did not already have a Phonathon program, would you start one or something else? My leadership actually asked me that exact same question a couple weeks ago. And so it's definitely a conversation we're having of like, if we remove these resources elsewhere, what would it look like? But we also recognize that it's an incredible part of our program right now. And so how do we balance that for the future? Last side of it is, we are a dollars and donors program. We're not necessarily chasing APR, but we are kind of chasing building the pipeline. And so for us, it's a critical, as I've mentioned multiple times, it's a critical part of our program. And so, how do we, inflate the digital balloon and deflate other balloons and those type of things to really align with where, we need to be going as a modern annual giving shop, the conversations that I'm having with leadership, at least.
That's great. Jeff, anything else to add to that? Anything different conversations that are taking place in Happy Valley?
No, I mean, well, I'm sure there are. Like I said, I'm not necessarily the one sitting in that room getting the question that Adam got, but I think there is definitely a focus on what is the ROI of our phone program. I think the question in my mind, whether I'm asking it or answering it, is, are we using ROI in the right way? Are we just focusing on dollars and donors? In which case that answer is different than, are we looking at more of the qualitative ROI, the relationships, the engagement opportunities, the connections, finding that diamond in the rough. That's not going to improve your bottom line all that much. But if that person, as a result of the phone call, becomes the next 8-figure donor 10 years down the road, then yeah, that's a worthwhile program, at least in my book. And so I think there probably needs to be a shift in the definition of ROI of phone programs as we're thinking about how we're using it differently, and not just looking at how many dollars, how many donors did it bring in, depending on what your focus is at your institution.
Kelly, I have a sneaking suspicion you've had some of these conversations recently. So, what has been the focus there?
Yeah, I think the focus is, how do you maximize each piece as part of a larger piece? So how do you maximize and get the most out of phone with the right people to be spending your time calling versus texting versus getting both? The people who need multiple touch points, the people who need multiple emails, the people who need multiple mail pieces throughout the year. And I think something interesting from, Adam mentioned, we have this finite number of people. And in one hand, we have a finite number of people. We have alumni, they're graduating. There's only so many graduating every year. It is what it is. But, we've also taken this aspect of thinking about our institution differently, in the sense that, how are we impacting the community? We have a new medical school, and our medical school is graduating 50 students a year. So to grow an annual fund for them, to grow a donor base for them, it's not going to come from their alumni. It's going to come from community impact. It's going to come from healthcare fundraising, to grow some of our, the nonprofit like components within our institution, like our radio station and some of our other programs. We have to think like a lot of small nonprofits that add up to one. And so we're trying to kind of take a different approach to, how do we build that donor base outside of just our alumni, but our alumni, our parents, our non-alumni constituents, our community constituents. And so phone is just one small piece of the puzzle. And so it's, how many resources do you allocate to it? And can we do it? Do we do it differently? Do we do it the same? And we've added 2 giving days. That's one big thing that I feel like I should definitely throw out there, is we've decided we're going to do 2. It worked for us. It brings in new donors. Our crowdfunding has grown tremendously in the past 5 years. Like, we have other channels that are bringing in new donors. So it's not like we're not bringing in new donors through other things, but there are still people who only give through phone. So if we want to continue to grow, we have to just find the right amount for each piece of the puzzle.
I have to ask about the giving day because I think it's so interesting what happened at Austin with 40 for 40 and doing a second giving day. Because a lot of people ask that question, is a giving day something that maybe takes place more than once per year? Is it maybe more of a staple in how we organize annual giving? Just tell us real quickly, did the same donors give again? Was one slightly bigger? What were your results and what did you discover with the second 40 for 40?
Yeah, so the first time we did it on accident, and this year we're doing it on purpose. So I will say it was unintentional because of COVID, and now it's intentional because the results were we had almost entirely different donors that gave in the fall, that gave in the spring. There was only a 14% overlap, and we want to see if we're going to do that again. We don't know what's going to happen, but to me, Giving Day is crowdfunding, whether you do it for 1 day, 2 days, a month. The idea of doing crowdfunding campaigns, digital efforts, having ambassadors fundraise for you, it's another whole avenue. When you're thinking about students and student engagement, we have students who are fundraising on their own behalfs through us to raise money for themselves on Giving Day for crowdfunding. So it's working so far, and I'm really interested. Our last campaign happened in September. Our next one's going to be in April. And at the end of this year, I'll really know if it was just a COVID, if it was because of COVID, or if we really can do 2 Giving Days a year. And if we want to, and if it's worth it from a resource standpoint.
It's really interesting to explore because we always talk about a robust multi-channel strategy, right? Well, that's what a Giving Day always is. I mean, if you've got phone's plugged into Giving Day. If you're doing texting, you're definitely doing it during Giving Day, if no other time of the year. Of course, digital is a big part of it. And then we kind of fall back into our siloed strategies, I mean, not even just in the channels, but think about the campus-wide collaboration for a really good Giving Day. All the units working together, everybody rowing in the same direction. It's almost, I think in my opinion, it's almost exactly how annual giving should look. So maybe we do 4 Giving Days throughout the year. Maybe they're a little different. Maybe not.
To the point that
maybe with some more resources. Yeah.
A Giving Day is just a campaign. It is a true campaign. We're calling it a Giving Day. We're calling it whatever. We're calculating. We have a goal, but we do mail pieces where we have a match and we have a challenge, and we have a deadline, and that's all the Giving Day. They're all the same thing. So Giving Day just uses the technology and the resources of digital and maybe ads and ambassadors. But all of those features, to your point, make a good campaign. So
absolutely.
I don't want to be the person who tells anybody to do 4 Giving Days a year, though. So
I think it's great.
Well, we'll just need some more resources. That's all. So back to the conversations, Paul, you've had, I think, some pretty high level changes in leadership at Stony Brook over the years. So maybe you've had 2 different conversations. How have they gone around, the future of student to alumni engagement in the phone program?
Yeah, so I think Jeff made a good point earlier. A lot of it does center around ROI. I think, one leader is very, APR focused. We need the phone program because no matter the investment and like the lack of return on investment, it is really driving donor counts for our, alumni participation rate. And so, pandemic comes, budget crunch. Do we still need this? You have to make the argument in terms of, we're not just thinking about this from like this year's perspective, because yes, maybe we don't need that big budget gap this year. But we did an exercise with our leaders, our leadership, just showing that a first-time donor from the phone program 5 years later, what that cohort of first-time donors is giving, and it's significantly higher. Maybe 80,000 the first year for that, first-time donor program. Stony Brook is still like a young school, so it's not a huge number. But 5 years later, that same group of donors is giving 500,000. It's an exercise that RNL used to, I think, take a lot of clients through. That really shows like the long-term value. And then when you look at it from that perspective, like it's actually ROI positive, even though it may not be in that particular year. So that helps us. With new leadership now, it's a matter of thinking about it holistically, rather than just in the lens of advancement. How can we leverage it for, maybe even like a phone center where incoming calls come in, and people have questions about making a gift or anything about the university, may engage with the students and get those questions answered. And so we're not where we want to be yet with that. We're really in like the early stages of thinking about what that's going to look like. But that is the direction that we're going to head in. I think Ohio State University has made some progress in that regard. Being more like an engagement center university-wide rather than just like an acquisition or donor focused phone program. So I think integration is also the key. One thing that I laughed about is like we definitely don't want to get into like 4 Giving Days on my perspective, because then I think we wear out like the whole Giving Day mantra, and it might not be just as unique to the donors. But we really do a good job of all going in the same direction for Giving Day. Bringing on video engagement, bringing on text messaging for Giving Day, having volunteers talk about Giving Day all at the same time, and have for us, we've had our student phone program do Giving Day pre-give. So a month in advance, all their conversations are around, would you like to be a part of like the early give for Giving Day? Your gifts will still count for matches and challenges and so forth. And so that allows us to all be going in the same direction, like leading up to Giving Days. We also had two, both successful, about 20% retention from like the fall one to the spring one. So similar to Kelly at UT, but we're not taking the bold step of saying, let's try to do that again. But gonna be curious to see how it goes for you, Kelly.
I think there's an important point here about the Giving Day doing 4 a year. If you set aside the resources and you're just going to kill your annual giving staff if you announce that that's what we're doing, right? The thing is, though, like Paul, you mentioned kind of the potential for the donor fatigue, and you sort of lose the excitement. But not every, to Kelly's point about a Giving Day is really just a campaign, and it's just this like condensed effort where everybody's on the same page, where all of the channels are integrated, which is really like the dream. Not every campaign like that necessarily has to target your entire audience, and you do that 4 times a year. You can do more specific sort of urgency campaigns throughout the year where you're integrating your phone, whatever that looks like. You're integrating your mail campaign and then your email and social towards these specific different ideas that target different audiences. That's still a lot of work, but it may avoid some of that donor fatigue.
I think I would add to that. So Penn State doesn't do multiple giving days per se, but we have multiple large giving events. And I think the way that we think about them is that those are the start to unique journeys for those people. So we have our Day of Giving on Giving Tuesday, which why did I sign up for a November 10th webinar? But we have, we had a Big Ten Challenge back in September. In January, we have a campus athletics initiative. And all of those are, from an outsider's perspective, from a development outsider perspective, those would be considered giving days or giving initiatives, but they require a different set of resources internally. They are different internal stakeholders, to Adrian's point in the chat. They are different donor populations or potential donor populations on the external side. And so that's definitely part of the equation here. And it's just a matter of, to the point of this conversation, is how does phone fit into that? And from my perspective, it has a really important part to play in it.
So before I ruin any remaining credibility I have by suggesting multiple giving days every year, I'm going to turn over to James. Any more questions coming into the chat we want to address with the full group?
Just a couple of questions about how you manage your segmentation, and in particular, I'm going to pick on Adam again, because the answer here was that it's all about getting the right message in front of the right people on the right medium at the right time. Sure, that's fantastic. How do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that is we're working on it. I think that seems to be my answer for a lot of things these days. But I think that is the always be measuring, back to that mantra of like, how do you constantly kind of measure what's working and what's not, and evaluating these segments that are going through the channel to understand what's causing them to respond, and then using that to drive your next time you're doing something. And so I think for us, first, they're definitely kind of the easier segments. And when we're thinking about Phonathon, that just, it's the basics to start out with. It's who's in score, who's highly engaged with you through an engagement score, who's, interacting with you on social media, who are your phone only, as somebody said, your phone only live ons, those type of folks. That's the easy part to start with. And then as you start to come down and go deeper in some of your calling pools in particular, it's thinking about what are the other kind of avenues that, they've received this mail. All right, now we're calling to follow up with them and referencing that mail. When we're working with our leadership annual giving officers, they're doing some outreach, and they're using the mail as the entry point to say, hey, Justin, did you receive that mail? Oh, no, you didn't. Let me tell you what it was about. Those kind of things, and that digital engagement experience. And so I think some of our students can start to do that as well in a student digital engagement experience.
Yeah, sorry to pick on you.
Kelly, go ahead. I mean, you're trying to go from 105,000 to 150,000 donors. So you must have thought about how you're going to track all these things. What's the magic recipe?
I mean, I don't think there's a magic recipe yet, but we did have a meeting to talk about it. And I think in a perfect world, all our systems talk to each other in a way that they currently don't. I mean, I think that's the number one thing is there are tools that are out there and they have to work for advancement. They're working for, Target knows that I looked at something online and they're trying to sell it to me a minute later. So how do I, put something out there that's an option, tell a story about our band, and then know who's engaging with that story, who's clicked on the links, who's interested in, it on social media, who's, followed up with a story that was published by a newspaper, and then be able to solicit those people in a timely way, whether it's a text message, a phone call, an email, a video. How do we use the real time information that people are giving us that's out there that just we're not doing a good job of capturing? And so we're talking internally about how do we, my boss is calling it an engagement hub. How are we tracking the engagement of people from all these different places? And as a very decentralized, very large institution, it's really hard. And, we're struggling with, we have a lot of amazing work going on across our campus, but how do we pull these people all together? How do we pull the information together? How do we make sure we know the most current info? Because a lot of times the work we do is based off of behavior or things that they chose 20 years ago, a degree they got 20 years ago, a student org they were in 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, or whatever. So the answer is the technology has to talk. And that's the part. If anybody has a solution, you let me know, because that's the end game, right?
And this is interesting because just real quick, we're talking about how are we using students? How are we deploying students? What does their role look like? Well, there's quite a bit to do with data science, analysis, modeling. That's a huge part of this. But sorry, Adam, I interrupted you.
No, sorry. I was just going to add, I think, that what was being said that I think is really important is the idea around, we make a lot of assumptions about where somebody wants to support and what they, thus, because they graduated from X, they must want to be a donor to Y, and those type of things. And that's something we have to change and understand, our alumni or our constituents, whoever we're trying to with, are interacting with us. They're telling us something. They're clicking that vet med story every single time we publish something about it. They're interacting with every vet med story. But because they graduated from the College of, liberal arts, we're soliciting them for liberal arts. And so we've got to start to bring that data together to really that I think is part of the recipe to bake this cake that was being talked about as well.
And I would argue, Adam, as someone who managed the student callers in the day, that a good student caller could listen to what a donor said in that moment and then ask for that thing. And that's the piece that technology is catching up and making it so that we might be able to do it in a more streamlined, scalable, personalized way based on their behavior that isn't just asking open-ended questions on a phone call and getting them to tell us what we talk about next. So.
All right. Again, thank you everybody for chats, questions, and everything like that. I'm going to ask one more big question here of the panel. Jeff, we'll start with you on this one. Take all the budget constraints and limitations, forget about that for a second. Tell us what the gold say. What does the future of a student-led donor engagement program look like? What are the pieces?
So I think from my perspective, it's very similar to what Kelly and Adam were just saying. Having a system that knows this person, regardless of where they graduated, whatever assumptions we hold about them, we're going to present them with information about the institution that they're going to care about. So that whether it's giving to Penn State, whether it's giving through Penn State to something that they care about, there's that personalized journey for them where it's governed by their actions, not by what we want them to do. Because ultimately we can ask them 15 times, we can ask them till we're blue in the face, and we do. But if they're not hearing the right thing from us, they're never going to give. And so I think if money were no object, if donors did exactly what we wanted them to do, I think having that ability to present something personalized when they want it, when they need it, is kind of the gold standard that we're working towards. Will we get
Paul?
there? Who knows?
Paul, what does it look like at Stony Brook? What's the gold standard? What's the perfect mix and balance?
I mean, a lot of it does have to do with a lot of, what Jeff mentioned, what Kelly mentioned, trying to figure out, where are donors now, essentially, like, what are they doing now in life that they're going to be attracted to in terms of like something that's happening at Stony Brook that, they can see themselves getting behind, either attending or giving to. Um, we don't have like the magic bullet right now. I think we're all struggling to answer this question because we really don't. Like, and so I'm not going to try. But I do think that there's key indicators that we can use in the conversations that we have with our donors to kind of gather what we can ask them for more consistently, what we can, or how we can engage them more consistently. I think some of our data is there. I think where we struggle sometimes is like the analytics, like just really getting the information back from everything that we send out. Who are the people clicking on this article about like, a project that's happening related to, climate change, or something that's happening related to like AI, like who are the people who are really into those stories, right? So that we can center our Phonathon conversations around that. Having that type of analysis, I think, would be ideal. And so, we're going to be exploring, getting into the tools that allow us to, get into those type of specific conversations based on a lot of the emails that, that already go out, or looking at event registration habits and seeing if we can engage people based off of like what they're interested in and what they're raising their hands for. I think webinars also play a key factor, partnering with academic leaders and putting out webinars and seeing who signs up. In particular, depending on like the subject matter, there may be a fundraising opportunity there. And so there's a lot of tools that already exist. It's having the analytics to kind of like bring that back into the database and say, okay, spend your time talking about this rather than the general fund, or rather than a crisis challenge or the food pantry. Because I think we're always trying a lot of different things. That's one thing that's great about like us in the annual giving field. Like our game is numbers, and so we have to figure it out at the end of the day how to like grow those numbers. And so we do try a lot, but like having that information allows us to shoot and aim better, I think, is something that like I think we're all looking for. How we get there, it's probably more investment in like the infrastructure and advancement to kind of like tell us like, hey, this is where you want to spend more time.
Oh, you're the new VP, UT Austin. What does your program look like?
I would like a time machine to go back and educate people on the importance of philanthropy, because I think that is one of our biggest struggles, is that people don't understand the role philanthropy has played during their time here on our campus, during their time as a student, during their time as a faculty or staff member, to their students' experience as a parent. And so I think that some of it comes back to building the culture of philanthropy on our campuses from the day someone is interested in stepping foot on our campus, and understanding how big it really is and how important it is and how valuable that is. And that, unfortunately, is something that has no ROI. It doesn't have this magical number of like, this is going to raise us more money. It's really hard to track long term. And so I think that's one thing that I would really like to be able to spend more time and money on from day one. With that said, I mean, at the end of the day, we've all been struggling with staff. And I think that oftentimes annual giving is viewed as an entry-level role in higher education. And we are getting way too complicated and way too sophisticated to continue to look at annual giving as an entry-level position. It is complicated. It needs analytics. It needs, all these tools and resources and technology that's talking. So I would invest in a lot of the things that we can't immediately plug ROI into. And I think that's our biggest struggle, is, again, it's long-term value and an education that I would want to start thinking about.
Value of engagement. Adam, 45 seconds. What do we got?
Last thing I would add, I think everybody's already kind of said a lot of the great things. As I said at the beginning, student outreach is a critical component. And so what does that look like in the future? And how do we keep, our students talking to our alumni, talking to our constituents, because they love it so much. And that's just such a critical part of our program. And I think any really successful annual giving program out there.
All right. Again, thank you so much, everyone, our panelists. Adam Compton, NC State University, Jeff Hallett, Penn State University, Kelly Sullivan, UT Austin, and Paul Moite at Stony Brook University. Last questions for James. James, what does the evolution of the phone program mean to you?
I find that if you're trying to predict the future and people are recording you while you're doing it, you can end up looking foolish. So I'll just say this. I recently moved house from Ohio to Florida, 900 miles. I did the entire thing using my phone. I had a 10-minute video FaceTime tour of the house. And then sole way of communicating with my realtor was through text messaging. If I can buy a house, the most significant purchase that someone like me can do, I can do that by phone. I think it's pretty clear that there is a place for phone in our fundraising programs, but it's all about building trust. It's all about using the tools that you have. And I'm a big proponent for using video and text messaging, building trust to make personal relationships. That's what we're all trying to get at, right? Personal engagement at scale. That's what we've always been trying to do here. I still think there is a role for phone in doing that, but you have to be nimble and you have to be open to change.
Awesome. So again, at First Name, we are growing our client partner family this fall by a considerable margin. So we were able to do a lot of the student engagement team work. And what's great about that is we're learning so much from all of you. So to everybody on the call today, all the panelists, thank you so much for your time, your preparation for this really important topic. It's probably going to dominate the agenda for the next year plus in annual giving and beyond. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we'll hope to talk to every one of you soon.
Thanks, everyone.